mean, that's the kind of common sense idea people have, that there is something it means to be them, that they come into existence at birth, and there's something constant, a pearl of identity, if you like, and that remains the same all through life up until death. And there are various people who have said that's not the case at all. In fact, what we are is more like what Hume called a bundle, a collection of things. There's thoughts, memories, experiences, and so forth. And we're kind of like a collection of these things. And it's the collection that makes us who we are. It's not that there's some essence of self. Now, what I call the ego trick is how this bundle, this collection, nevertheless creates the sense of there being a unitary self. The important thing about that is that most people who hold this view, maybe not most, but certainly a lot, will talk about the self as being an illusion, that therefore the self doesn't really exist. So, for example, you have a recent book came out just before mine called The Ego Tunnel by a psychologist, Tom Metzinger. He talks about the self as illusion. David Eagleman, the psychologist, very good writer, but he talks about the single self being illusion, and we should think of ourselves as being a parliament of selves. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think that we can understand the self to be this collection, but that doesn't mean it's not real. So the ego trick, it's like I call a mechanic's trick, not a magician's trick. A magician's trick is basically convincing you something is real when it's not. It's just an illusion. A mechanic's trick is trying to get to something to work by all sorts of strange ad hoc sort of measures. That's what's going on in the brain. We are creating something which is genuinely a self, but it's out of an assemblage of parts. And the way to make that most clear, I think, is to think this is actually just like everything else in the universe. You've got a video camera there. That video camera is nothing more than a collection of its parts. Does that mean there's no such thing as a video camera? It's an illusion? Of course not. We have no problem at all accepting that everything that exists, other than perhaps fundamental particles, is just a collection of parts. And we're just the same. So that doesn't make us illusions. The only illusion is to think that there is this permanent, unchanging essence at the heart of it. How much difference accepting what I take to be the true view makes to your life is somewhat unclear, to be honest, because a lot of people don't really think about it either way and they just get on with life. But I think there are potential pitfalls of thinking of ourselves as having essences. One is that we get too fixed an idea of what we are. If we think there is this permanent core, then it's very easy to over-essentialise us. So we think, I am this kind of person. And we can see that people are very drawn to that. I mean, think of how people like to think, I'm a Gemini, or I'm a INLP, if they're Myers-Briggs types indicator, or whatever it might be. And when you get too fixed a view of yourself, you're not actually being true, I think, to the way we are, which is that we are more in flux than that. But it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, of course. If you believe yourself to be fixed, then that you therefore become more fixed. I think the other thing is that it doesn't lead to the healthiest attitude towards time and change and ultimately death. If you think you're this unchanging permanent pearl, then really, you are as much you in 20 years' time as you were 20 years ago, and death is going to be the sun snuffing out of something which has otherwise burnt with the same intensity and existed in the same way for however long you've lived. Once you accept that we are this kind of collection, you're better at accepting that we are something which is kind of always in flow, always changing. So the further into the future you go, in a way, the more you do become like another person. So I think it kind of makes the edges of a life fuzzier and less clear. And I think that's kind of helpful in embracing mortality and change. I find it really hard to make sense of this idea of an impersonal consciousness of which we just partake. I mean, I really can't. And I think that even if there is such a thing, that's certainly not what individuals and persons are. I mean, that's quite clear. And yeah, I talked to Tibetan lamas in the book who are supposedly reincarnations. And, it's very clear for them, although they talk about similar ideas, there is a sense in which there is an individual person in a life, and that's not the thing which is reincarnated. So, if you kind of have that view, it seems to me you're postulating the existence of something other than selves, which value is placed on for some reason, but I don't see, to be honest, how we can connect with that as an idea. It's kind of irrelevant. It's a bit like saying, our bodies are made of matter, which is ultimately made of energy, and ultimately everything in the universe is energy. Maybe there's something comforting in the thought that I am made of the same stuff as the rest of the universe, and that when I die, my stuff returns to the universe. Maybe there is, but that just seems to be a totally separate idea from the fact that there is this particular collection of stuff, is this particular individual, and when that collection breaks down, it goes. So I can't really... I think the odd thing about this idea is that people think thoughts about the connectedness of all energy, matter or consciousness have some bearing on how we should think about ourselves as individuals, and I think making that connection is quite difficult. No doubt, though, people seeing this who hold those views will be emailing me saying that they can explain it, and I'm just not sufficiently enlightened. I've had a few of those already. For a very long time, I've been attracted by character theories of ethics, which basically says that, becoming a certain person, inculcating certain good, virtuous habits is really at the heart of ethics, rather than memorizing a set of rules or just following that. But there's been a lot of research in psychology which suggests that character is actually a lot more variable and situation specific than we might think. So you might think of someone as like a generous person, for example, but actually it turns out how generous they are could depend on quite trivial things as to whether or not they're in a good mood or in a hurry, and also circumstances can quickly change it. So get someone with a white coat and a clipboard next to them telling them to behave in an ungenerous way, and they just will. So there's this big challenge to the idea of character. I think the response to that is to, and I think this is kind of in the spirit of Aristotle, although I don't think Aristotle worked this through, he wasn't aware of this research that would emerge over 2,000 years later, is that, real moral character is something that has to be built. So that means the fact that as a matter of fact we find character is very variable doesn't mean that the project of trying to build a consistent and strong character is a futile one. It simply shows that the majority of people most of the time haven't achieved that kind of character. So I think we have to look at character as something which is not just that everybody has one and some are good and some are bad and so forth. It's rather that actually most people do lack character in the sense of a stable set of traits which are going to remain the same over different situations. If we want character, we have to work on it, and it's an effort of the self. And actually this goes into a broader point, which again is very harmonious with the bundle theory, that being a particular person is in a sense a work of the self. It's a project, it's not just a given. And I think that's an important, positive, constructive point. In terms of my favourites, I have two philosophers really who vie for top position, but they share something, they're Aristotle and Hume. And the reason is, what I love about both of them is that they, for me, get the balance right in philosophy, which is so hard to get right, which is the balance between being as precise as you can, but also no more precise than you can be. I never tire of repeating Aristotle's line, which is the mark of the trained mind only to accept as much precision as a subject matter allows. But it's really important to get that degree of precision. There's no point being vague in mathematics. In the same way, ethics and politics clearly are not like mathematics. So push too hard to be rigorous and analytic, you will break ethics, you won't be able to make it work. At the same time, it's possible to be too loose about it. So I think both of them really exemplify this element of fine judgment which is needed in the great mind, which is to know exactly how precise you can be and push that far but no further.